Welcome along, everyone. My name is Scott Cardinal. Thank you for joining me around the campfire. As you may already know, most of what I do revolves around teaching architectural history and design psychology. My main area of interest is how very creative people throughout history have lived and worked. I think that there is much inspiration to be derived from learning about the homes and the gardens and the workspaces of people such as Thomas Jefferson and Mozart, John Lennon, George Harrison, David Bowie, Jimmy Page, Lewis Carroll, Hans Christian Andersen, as well as all sorts of other great musicians and writers and artists and other creative luminaries all over the world over the course of time. Doing so, I feel, can benefit other people who are also looking to be as productive and creative as they can be, no matter what sort of endeavor they're engaged in. One place that I've been particularly fascinated with since I was a kid is the Dakota apartment building in New York City. You see, I've walked past and around the Dakota countless times. And I've been fortunate enough to have been inside the Dakota and many of its incredible apartments. You see, the Dakota has always been filled with rich and famous people, including Lauren Bacall and Leonard Bernstein. Rudolf Nureyev lived there, so did Polly Bergen, Roberta Flack, and Boris Karloff, and even the original Steinway piano family lived there in the 1800s, and many, many, many others. And, as you know, John Lennon lived there too, along with his wife, Yoko Ono. Interestingly, prior to 1980, most people did not know that John Lennon lived there until the worldwide news of his untimely death. Unfortunately, at that point, the Dakota became the most famous apartment building in the entire world. But it was because of how John Lennon's death completely overshadowed the amazing architecture and history of the legendary Dakota that I started writing and talking about the building when I was a kid, and why I still do. You see, I've always wanted people to learn that there's so much more to know about the Dakota than what happened to John Lennon that night. But despite my best efforts, including writing several books about the Dakota, people still continue to ask me about John Lennon and what happened and where it happened and how it happened. One thing I have learned over the course of my research is that there's a lot of incorrect information out there. So, by providing available information here today to you, I am hoping to satisfy people's curiosity about what may or may not have happened to John Lennon at the Dakota on December 8th, 1980. Let's start off with a little bit of backstory. In 1971, John and Yoko were living on a beautiful English estate called Tittenhurst Park. It was said that Yoko wasn't very happy in England. None of Lennon's friends and family seemed to like her, and so it's been said that it was she who suggested that they move to New York City. Meanwhile, there's another story that's been told about how Yoko was seeking custody of her daughter in the USA, and that John and Yoko went to the USA to try to get her. And it was taking a lot longer than expected, and John couldn't leave the country, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to return. And so they decided to stay, and he was going to start fighting to earn a green card. It's also been said that neither of those are correct, and that John and Yoko were simply planning to go to the USA very briefly, but to hassle President Richard Nixon. I have no idea what the true story is. Perhaps it was a combination of all three, or two out of three, or maybe none of those reasons, or maybe there were plenty of reasons. It really doesn't matter. John and Yoko were perfectly entitled to look for a place to live where they could be happy. And so they left their home in England and they went to New York City. At first, John and Yoko were living in beautifully decorated rooms at the top of the St. Regis Hotel near the plaza overlooking Central Park. In 1973, John and Yoko rented a two-bedroom loft in Lower Manhattan from the drummer of the Lovin' Spoonful. It was a great place and a great location, but it wasn't the place they permanently wanted to call home. So they soon found out that there was an apartment available in the legendary Dakota apartment building. It has been said that they leased the apartment first, and then they purchased it from the children of actor Robert Ryan, and that John and Yoko moved in during February of 1973. It is not known if that story is true, however, because after the building went co-op around 1960, leasing apartments in the Dakota kind of really wasn't a thing anymore. The people who lived there owned their apartments. But either way, John Lennon must have been thrilled to have been able to purchase the apartment in the Dakota and to begin to settle into his new home. It was great in so many ways. The apartment was huge, and the rooms could easily be repurposed and redesigned for different uses. The apartment was located on the top floor overlooking Central Park. Also, there was only one main entry into the Dakota apartment building, so it offered plenty of security. Everything just looked great, and they had every reason to be excited about their future. It has been written that soon after moving in, John and Yoko went on a cross-country car journey, and they decided to kick their drug addiction. When they returned, they were ready to start the next chapter in their exciting lives. However, in mid-1973, it's been said that Yoko decided that she and John needed to split up, at least for a little while. So, beginning in October 1973, Yoko continued to stay at the Dakota, but John, well, he moved out to California with his assistant, May Pang, and it was Yoko who instructed her to take care of John. After 18 months of John working and drinking in California, he and May Pang moved back to Manhattan. The story goes that John then dropped May Pang and returned to living with Yoko in their apartment at the Dakota. And a new phase of their life had begun. John and Yoko surprised everyone by staying under the radar and keeping to themselves in an effort to maintain their privacy. It has been said that when they left the building, they were sometimes wearing disguises so they would not be recognized. Whether or not that ever worked is another story altogether. But by all accounts, they really loved living in the Dakota and in New York City. On October 9th, 1975, on John Lennon's 35th birthday, their son Sean was born. Now the Dakota would be a home for the three of them. It's been said that John Lennon, for the most part, spent the next 5 years kind of hanging out at home and then doing some traveling and spending time in his other homes, namely their mansion in Long Island. In January 1980, John and Yoko purchased a large oceanfront estate in Palm Beach, Florida. Beginning in August 1980, John and Yoko started putting together an album entitled Double Fantasy. It was released on November 17th, 1980. Following that, John and Yoko began putting together a follow-up album that would be entitled Milk and Honey. It was one of the songs from that next album that John and Yoko were producing on December 8th, 1980. So, if you're ready, let's travel back in time to December 8th, 1980, and learn a little bit about what happened and what people think had happened that day and night. As you know, on December 8th, 1980, John Lennon was 40 years old. That afternoon, photographer Annie Leibovitz took a photo that would soon grace the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. It was John Lennon's idea to pose completely nude in a fetal position with his leg wrapped over Yoko Ono, who was laying down next to him. John's original idea was for Yoko to be nude also, but it's been said that at the last minute she changed her mind and she decided to remain fully clothed. At that point, all the photographer had to do was climb up on a ladder, lean over, and snap some photos. I don't know how much a photographer gets paid for that sort of thing, but that seemed to be a pretty easy gig. John then conducted a 3-hour interview for RKO Radio. At 4:30 p.m., John and Yoko left the Dakota to head over to the recording studio. On the sidewalk, outside of the Dakota, there was a creepy guy, and he asked John to autograph his copy of the Double Fantasy album cover. And John graciously did so. John and Yoko then went to the studio, and they spent 4.5 hours mixing Yoko's song, Walking on Thin Ice. When they were done, John was told by his producer, David Geffen, that the album, Double Fantasy, had gone gold. It's been said that John was elated. Word has it that he was even considering touring with the album in 1981. Now, no doubt he must have been concerned that the album was already garnering some bad reviews from such publications as Rolling Stone, The Village Voice, and some others. But either way, there were plenty of reasons to celebrate. So John and Yoko planned to go to the Stage Deli for dinner. But John supposedly wanted to go home and say goodnight to Sean. And so they decided to go back to the Dakota instead. At 10:35 p.m., their limousine was driving up Central Park West. At 10:48 p.m., the limousine parked directly in front of the entrance to the Dakota. Yoko exited the vehicle first, and she walked into the Dakota's entryway. A moment later, John stepped out onto the sidewalk. He supposedly, briefly, looked at the man who, earlier that day, handed him the album to sign. Even though it was very warm out, that creepy guy was still wearing a thick hat and a heavy jacket. Lennon then passed through the Dakota's security gates. John Lennon was home, where he spent so much time, and where he was safe, and where he was comfortable, and where he always wanted to be. Imagine the feeling going through John Lennon's mind as he returned to his home and was on his way to see his 5-year-old son. He was walking straight ahead, and he was halfway through the enclosed entryway when the sound of gunshots rang out. This is where things get a bit hazy, because even though this was one of the most famous crimes in American history, there was never an official report done to explain exactly what happened. So what I'm going to describe next is kind of a combination of truth and some speculation. See, I've read many different accounts, and they vary quite a bit. For example, it's been reported that the first bullet passed over John Lennon's head and smashed into a window in front of him. Now, when I first read that, many years ago, it didn't make any sense to me. What window would have been smashed? If John Lennon was walking straight down the middle of the Dakota's entry, because that's what he would have done if he was walking through the second set of gates and toward the courtyard, at which point he would have turned right and then gone up into the private lobby that would have had the elevator and the stairs that would have brought him to his apartment. So if John Lennon was doing that, he was walking straight down the middle, then the window that would have been hit would have been on the other side of the courtyard and would have entered a ground floor apartment on the north side of the Dakota. But there's no evidence that ever happened. It has also been written that 2 bullets followed that struck Lennon in the back. It has also been written that another 2 bullets then penetrated John Lennon's left shoulder. It has also been written that there was an additional shot that supposedly missed John Lennon altogether and then went into a glass window in front of John Lennon. For those who are keeping count, that would have been 6 bullets. But a Charter Arms Undercover .38 Special revolver only holds 5 rounds. So anything that's ever been written that claims those scenarios I just described are clearly incorrect. Unless, of course, there were 2 guns that were used. We'll talk about that for a quick bit in a minute. But for now, where is the window that was supposedly smashed? And if 2 bullets missed Lennon, then was he shot in the back once and the shoulder twice? Or was he shot in the back twice and the shoulder once? What really happened? We don't know. Now, there is a photograph of glass that got smashed, but it wasn't a window belonging to an apartment in the Dakota. It was actually located on the far right side of the entry, in front of the door leading to the security office. In fact, it wasn't a window at all. I suppose they should have just written that it was a glass door that was shot. That would have been more accurate. Okay, so now back to the second shooter theory. If there was one, he could have easily hidden behind the gate on the southwest side of the entry. From that angle, the shooter's bullets would have hit that glass if John Lennon was indeed walking down the center of the entryway, as so many people have written about and assumed and believed. But since this is a discussion that would kind of freak people out, and it's not a discussion I am here to discuss, let's move on. In fact, kindly allow me to quote from a report that I had read. Here goes. 3 of the 4 bullets that struck Lennon's back passed completely through his body and out of his chest. One of the existing bullets from his chest hit and became lodged in his upper left arm, while the 4th lodged itself into his aorta beside his heart. Nearly all of them would have been fatal by themselves because each bullet had ruptured vital arteries around the heart. Lennon had been shot 4 times at close range with hollow point bullets, and his affected organs, particularly his left lung and major blood vessels above his heart, were virtually destroyed upon impact. And that's the end of that. Now, what is interesting about that report is the claim that 3 of the bullets passed through his body. So I'm going to now paraphrase from another report about what happens when someone is shot with hollow point bullets. Here goes. Hollow point rounds tend to shatter once they enter the body after being shot. That being said, if a man is hit in the stomach, it will cause a massive gastric hemorrhage, which can simultaneously cause hypovolemic shock. The bullet shot in the lungs will immediately cause the respective lung to collapse, along with pleural effusion and hemorrhage. Bullets to the liver will result in massive internal bleeding due to high vascularity of the liver. The person will go into shock and die due to a massive loss of blood, low blood pressure, cardiac arrest, and more. Death can occur within 5 minutes. Given the damage done by hollow points and the important nature of all 3 targeted areas, chances are good that the victim will be dead within seconds. Half his vitals are pulped. His body is full of shrapnel, and he's probably bleeding out from multiple major blood vessels. He certainly won't be breathing. Now, let's stop for a moment and talk about hollow point bullets. Here's some other information that I came across. First, what is a hollow point bullet? As the name implies, the tip is hollow and has a cavity cut or formed. The idea behind this is that when the bullet passes through liquid-like material at sufficient velocity, the pressure of the fluid inside the hollowed-out area causes the bullet material to push outward or expand. Hollow point bullets do not exit the body in one piece. They rip a huge, gaping hole on exit after disintegrating on impact. Kind of like sticking a shotgun deep into your stomach or mouth before pulling the trigger. Hollow point bullets are much more surely to cause death than standard ammunition. When a hollow point bullet strikes a soft target, the pressure created in the pit forces the material, usually lead, around the inside edge to expand outwards, increasing the axial diameter of the projectile as it passes through. This process is commonly referred to as mushrooming, because the resulting shape, a widened, rounded nose on top of a cylindrical base, typically resembles a mushroom. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth is a guy that teaches people about architectural history and design talking about all of this? Well, simply put, I'm trying to clear up some of the myths about what may or may not have happened to John Lennon that night. You see, way too many articles have been written that have the same false info in them and are repeated and believed over and over and over again. So, given the information I just provided, it's kind of difficult to believe that John Lennon continued walking and then opened up a glass door with the bullet hole in it, and then walked further, and then turned right, and then walked up a flight of steps, and then pushed open the heavy door that led into the building's security office. Now, maybe John Lennon did do all of that. But if he did, was he really shot multiple times with hollow point bullets? And if so, was he hit where it's been said he was hit? We just don't know. Now, it's been said that once John Lennon was in the security office, it was there where he finally dropped the cassettes that he was carrying. And then he fell down to the floor, and Yoko embraced her husband. It's sad. It's horrifying. It's a nightmare. And it's easy to just get lost into thinking about the emotional experience of all of this. But one of the questions that people should wonder about outside of that is, if he was shot in the shoulder, whether once or twice, and that the arteries were destroyed that supplies blood to his arms, which arm was he using to open the door, and which arm was he using to hold the cassettes? Was he using one arm to do both? Think about it this way. If you were holding something in your left hand, and you got shot once or twice in your left shoulder, would you still be able to carry whatever you were carrying? Probably not. So it is safe to say that his left arm would have been rendered useless, right? So let's assume he was holding the cassettes with his right hand. Or maybe even that they were being held in a case with a strap over his shoulder. No one seems to know. But let's just assume that after having just been shot 4 or 5 times with enough firepower to bring down an elephant, John Lennon continued to walk and climb stairs and open up a couple of doors. Look, I don't want anyone to start accusing me of creating or believing conspiracy theories. I'm not interested in doing that. I'm just sharing all the information that I have read over the course of time. And so much of it just doesn't make any sense, and it's also confusing, and it's kind of hard to pick and choose what we should or should not believe. Either way, it's been reported that the concierge on duty summoned the police and he approached John Lennon. It's been said that he turned him over and he noticed the severity of the multiple injuries. It's been said that he covered John Lennon's chest with his uniform jacket and then he removed John Lennon's blood-covered glasses. Back outside, by the way, it's been reported that the shooter didn't even try to escape, even though he easily could have. I mean, there was nobody there to stop him from darting into the subway or into Central Park. Or was there? There were a few people walking by that witnessed what happened, including the security guard, who didn't seem to tackle the shooter or apprehend him in any way. So that seemed a bit unusual, but either way, let's move on. It's been reported that the shooter calmly removed his coat and he began flicking through a copy of The Catcher in the Rye. It is because of this particular action that, if it's true, has led many people around the world to wonder if this was all part of a government assassination plot and that the assassin was under some sort of mind control and maybe he was programmed to follow out his mission and then stop and read the book, which, as we all know, has quite a bit of relevance to what happened. In any event, let's stay focused on this historic event. So, within 2 minutes, it's been said the street in front of the Dakota was full of sirens. And officers arrived and the shooter was confronted immediately. But because he didn't run or put up any kind of resistance, the police weren't even sure if he was truly the shooter. The story then goes that the Dakota's guard confirmed what had happened. The shooter was then cuffed and put into the back of a police car. A second team of officers arrived a few minutes later. The story goes that they rushed into the security office and it was there where they supposedly found John Lennon on the floor. Now, the reason I say supposedly is for the benefit of those who think that John Lennon actually managed to continue walking and opening doors and climbing stairs after being repeatedly shot with hollow point bullets. After all, I've also read there are some people that said that after being shot, John Lennon just went right down right there. And that's not the most romantic image in the world, and people kind of don't want to think that the shooter was able to see all of the horrific damage that he had done, shooting John Lennon in the back and then watching him either die right there in the entryway, or, from what some people have told me, John Lennon may have been dead before he even hit the ground after being hit with that much firepower. But either way, let's stick to the story that's mostly been written, which is that John Lennon was in the security office after all that happened, and that the officers immediately carried John Lennon into their squad car. In the chaos that ensued, it has been said that the officers almost put John Lennon in the back seat of the police car that held the deranged shooter. There is a story out there that one of the police officers put John Lennon in the back seat of the squad car, and he was over him, and he asked John Lennon if he knew who he was, and that John Lennon supposedly replied, "Yes, I am John Lennon." Do you think that happened? Do you think 10 minutes after being shot with hollow point bullets multiple times and having his internal organs destroyed and his lungs and his throat and his mouth all filled with blood, that John Lennon was listening and thinking or talking about anything? I don't think so. And a lot of people might be upset by hearing something like that. But have you ever been in horrible pain? Have you ever hurt your back or broken your leg or hurt your finger or your arm or your head or your leg or anything really, really bad? And you just wanted the pain to stop? Well, if you like John Lennon or you love John Lennon and you're horrified about what happened, wouldn't it be better to think that his pain ended pretty quickly rather than that he was walking around and suffering and thinking about what happened? Seems to me that that might be a better way to go. Also, it's been said that John Lennon went to the security office and he said, "I've been shot." Well, I don't know about you, but I've been with people that have been shot before. And bullets don't sound like you think they do. They don't sound like they do in the movies or the television show. In fact, unless you expect to be shot at, you have no idea what that noise is. I've been in a situation where I was shot at and it sounded like firecrackers, or maybe even sounded like a car backfiring. You're not thinking about it. Your brain just isn't wrapped around the idea of being shot at. And when you consider John Lennon wasn't in the middle of the street, he wasn't in the middle of a field, he was inside of an enclosed entryway. The noise must have been unbelievably loud. In fact, I spoke to people that live inside the Dakota who were there that night, and they told me they thought a boiler exploded. Someone else told me they thought a car backfired. Nobody thought it was gunshots. And so the idea that John Lennon is walking and something hits him in the back and he feels incredible pain, why in the world he would suddenly think, "Oh, I've been shot," justifies common sense. I had somebody die in front of me who was shot. And he wasn't hit with hollow point bullets. He was hit with regular bullets. And he was bleeding. And he had no idea what was going on. Didn't even occur to him that he was shot. He was just kind of freaking out and in shock, and wasn't a thought in his mind that he was shot or concerned about his safety. Wasn't saying anything like, "Oh my God, get that guy," or "This is horrible, I can't believe this, I was shot." No, just in horrible pain, lots of confusion, and passed away. And what John Lennon experienced was, 1,000 times worse than what I dealt with that gentleman dying right in front of me. Either way, back to John Lennon. Driving as fast as they could, the officers rushed John Lennon to Roosevelt Hospital. At 11:01 p.m., John Lennon was wheeled into the emergency room. By that point, he had lost 80% of his blood. Although 7 medics desperately tried to revive him, John Lennon was pronounced dead. Yoko Ono arrived at the hospital and she was told the bad news. Needless to say, she was in shock. She couldn't believe it. But she courageously pulled herself together as best she could, and she requested that the hospital please don't make a formal statement for at least 15 minutes. You see, she needed that time so she could go home and turn off the television so that Sean would not see what happened to his father on the evening news. The first media report of John Lennon's death was announced by Howard Cosell on ABC's Monday Night Football. As word of the shooting spread throughout the city, a spontaneous vigil began to form outside the Dakota. By 1 a.m., a crowd of nearly 1,000 people had gathered. They began to sing John Lennon songs, they lit candles, and they turned the building's gate into a shrine. They covered it with flowers and pictures of John Lennon. And so that's what may or may not have happened to John Lennon at the Dakota on December 8th, 1980. It was a horrible night for John Lennon and his family and his friends and his fans and all of humanity. And it was also a horrible night for the Dakota, because since then, all most people do when they see the Dakota is think about that awful night and what happened to John Lennon. And so that's another tragedy of that night, because there's so much more to know about the magnificent place that John Lennon was proud to call his home. And that is why I have spent so much of my time and energy and efforts trying to teach people about the Dakota. So, If you found this to be educational or interesting in some way, please do me a favor. Head over to audibleadventures.com. It's a website that I developed. There's also an app for it. And you could sign up for a subscription in order to listen to audio tours that I have written and produced about the Dakota, to give you an idea of what it's like to walk around the Dakota and inside the Dakota and learn a heck of a lot about its history. You could also purchase some of the books that I had written about the Dakota as well. Audible Adventures is also a great place to learn about other interesting historic homes and gardens and workspaces of the world's most creative luminaries. Also, please remember to subscribe to this channel and check out some of my other assorted social media sites. I'm on Facebook and Parler and a bunch of others. And I look forward to sharing more stories with you in the future around the campfire.